The end of July 2025 has brought a torrent of significant developments across the American political and social landscape, marked by contentious new federal policies, ongoing legal battles, and high-profile allegations that underscore a period of profound uncertainty and shifting paradigms. From sweeping executive orders aiming to redefine approaches to homelessness and immigration to a whistleblower's claims and renewed focus on a deeply disturbing historical scandal, the week's headlines paint a picture of a nation grappling with the far-reaching implications of its leadership's directives and past actions. A major focus of the week has been the Trump administration's aggressive push to fundamentally reshape domestic policy, particularly concerning vulnerable populations. Last week, President Donald Trump signed a new executive order targeting homelessness. A move that aims to shift how the country manages the crisis by making it easier for states and cities to move individuals living on the street into treatment for mental illness or addiction. This includes, in some instances, the potential for forced treatment. The administration's rationale, as reported by NPR, suggests that the federal government has spent tens of billions of dollars on housing without addressing the root causes of homelessness. However, this approach has drawn immediate criticism from advocates who worry that the order fails to tackle those underlying systemic issues and could infringe upon individual liberties. Parallel to this domestic reorientation, the administration's hardline stance on immigration and refugees continues to trigger widespread concern and legal challenges. A federal judge in Maryland, for instance, temporarily blocked the administration's restrictions on immigrants' access to certain social services until at least September 3. Following a lawsuit filed by a coalition of 20 states and Washington, D.C. These restrictions stemmed from new guidance issued by various federal agencies, including the Department of Health and Human Services (HHS), which broadly reinterpreted the 1996 Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act pro ora to drastically expand the definition of federal public benefit. This reinterpretation has led to cuts in access for refugees and many immigrants to vital services such as the Head Start preschool program, mental health support, and assistance for those facing homelessness. Further compounding the issue, many humanitarian arrivals are already set to lose access to SNAP, Medicaid, Medicare, and Affordable Care Act benefits due to a recently passed multi-billion-dollar reconciliation bill in Congress. The refugee admissions program, meanwhile, remains in a state of indefinite suspension. Thousands of refugees, many of whom were approved for resettlement prior to President Trump's ban, are reportedly stranded overseas in perilous conditions. A lower courts framework for reviewing and processing these cases is currently on pause, with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals expected to soon issue a decision on whether it can proceed. Adding to the lack of transparency, the administration has reportedly failed to make public any information regarding reports mandated by the refugee ban executive order. These reports, due every 90 days since April 20, are meant to detail whether the resumption of the U.S. refugee admissions program is in the national interest, leaving the status of countless vulnerable individuals in limbo. The human cost of these policies is stark, with organizations like CWSglobal.org sharing stories of families like the Sung family from Myanmar split apart and desperately awaiting reunification, or individuals like Doa, a single mother with children who are survivors of violence and torture, whose long-awaited flights to safety have been cancelled. Separately, 21 states and Washington, D.C. have also filed a lawsuit against the USDA for instructing states to share the personal information of food assistance applicants. Beyond these sweeping policy overhauls, the week also saw other significant developments that stirred political waters. A whistleblower, as reported by the Washington Post, alleged that Emil Bowe, a key figure in legal proceedings, misled lawmakers concerning the case of NYC Mayor Eric Adams. While details remain scarce, such allegations raise critical questions about accountability and the integrity of governmental processes, adding another layer of complexity to an already tumultuous political environment. Concurrently, former President Trump made headlines with his controversial comments regarding Jeffrey Epstein, claiming Epstein stole young women, including Virginia Giuffre, from his Mar-a-Lago spa. These remarks, reported by PBS, Reignite scrutiny of the deeply disturbing Epstein scandal and Trump's past associations, underscoring the persistent public and legal interest in the long-tail impacts of such high-profile cases. As these events unfold, the coming weeks will undoubtedly be shaped by ongoing legal battles and the practical implementation of new executive orders. The Ninth Circuit's decision on the refugee framework, the federal judge's ruling on immigrant benefits, and the various state-led lawsuits will determine the immediate future for millions. The broader implications of the administration's reinterpretation of federal laws and its approach to social welfare programs will likely be debated for years to come, influencing policy, legal precedent, and the very fabric of social support systems. Meanwhile, the political accountability of officials and public figures will remain under intense scrutiny, pointing to a period where legal challenges and public discourse will continue to define the national narrative. The ever-volatile intersection of politics, entertainment, and digital discourse once again took center stage this week as Donald Trump weighed in on the recent cancellation of CBS's The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. In a series of characteristic posts on Truth Social on Tuesday, Trump vehemently denied being solely responsible for the show's demise, a claim he asserted everybody was making. Instead, he attributed the decision to what he termed a pure lack of talent on Colbert's part, coupled with significant financial drain, stating the show was costing CBS $50 million a year in losses, and it was only going to get worse. This denial, however, quickly morphed into a broader commentary on the late-night landscape and a stark prediction for other prominent hosts. Trump explicitly named ABC's Jimmy Kimmel and NBC's Jimmy Fallon as the next in line for cancellation, labeling Kimmel even less talented and Fallon weak and very insecure. He then laid out his simplified philosophy of show business, declaring, "If you get ratings, you can say or do anything. If you don't, you always become a victim." Colbert became a victim to himself, the other two will follow. The former Apprentice fixture even posed the question, the only real question is who will go first. CBS executives, in their official statement announcing The Late Show's cancellation, maintained that the decision was purely financial, explicitly rejecting any claims linking it to political pressure or the impending acquisition of its parent company Paramount by Skydance. This stands in stark contrast to Trump's narrative, especially given that Colbert had previously criticized Paramount's settlement with Trump regarding its 60 Minutes segment on Kamala Harris, which Colbert had derisively called a big fat bribe. Intriguingly, despite Trump's assertion that lack of talent and poor ratings were the culprits for Colbert's cancellation, recent viewership data tells a different story. During the second quarter of this year, The Late Show with Stephen Colbert actually outperformed its late-night rivals, drawing 2.4 million viewers. This compares favorably to Jimmy Kimmel's 1.8 million viewers and Jimmy Fallon's 1.2 million. This discrepancy raises questions about the true drivers behind CBS's decision, suggesting that while financial considerations are paramount for networks, the narrative around talent and ratings can be selectively applied or interpreted, particularly in the highly politicized realm of late-night comedy. The substantial reported losses, even with leading viewership, point to deeper structural challenges within the traditional broadcast model rather than just individual host performance. The late-night hosts themselves have not remained silent. Jimmy Kimmel, currently on holiday, responded on Instagram with characteristic humor and a subtle jab, remarking, "I know you're busy sharpieing the Epstein files, but this seems like a weird way to tell people to watch Matt Damon and Ken Jennings on an all-new Who Wants to Be a Millionaire tomorrow night at 8/7 on at ABC." This follows his more direct earlier criticism of CBS after Colbert's cancellation, where he posted, "F you and all your Sheldon CBS." Jimmy Fallon, for his part, expressed being shocked by the news. Seth Meyers, host of NBC's Late Night, also weighed in on the broader industry climate, acknowledging that the fate of his show feels outside of my control. Fearing that the ecosystem might not support late night at some point, a sentiment that speaks to the shifting sands of television consumption and profitability. This isn't the first time Trump has targeted late night hosts. He has a long history of public feuds with comedians who have satirized him. In fact, just a week prior to this latest Truth Social post, he had expressed a desire to take credit for potential late night departures, stating, "I hope I played a major part in it." This shift from claiming credit to denying sole responsibility while still predicting further cancellations highlights a calculated approach to managing narratives and maintaining influence over public perception even within the entertainment sphere. The ongoing drama underscores the intense pressure and scrutiny faced by traditional broadcast media, particularly late-night shows, as they navigate evolving audience habits, economic realities, and the omnipresent shadow of political commentary in the digital age. The future of late-night television remains uncertain, caught between legacy formats, the demands of profitability, and an increasingly polarized media landscape where every comment, whether from a host or a political figure, becomes part of a larger interconnected narrative. The political landscape continues to churn with a potent mix of high-stakes diplomacy, enduring scandal, and strategic maneuvering as President Donald Trump's recent 4-day trip to Scotland highlighted the inescapable nature of Washington's ongoing dramas. Even amidst rounds of golf at his prestigious Turnberry and Aberdeen courses and crucial meetings with European leaders, the specter of the Jeffrey Epstein files controversy proved a persistent shadow, illustrating the pervasive reach of a story that has ignited a political firestorm. NPR White House correspondent Franco Ordonez, traveling with the president, reported that despite an ocean separating him from the immediate fray, Trump could not entirely escape the intense scrutiny over his administration's handling of documents related to the convicted sex offender. Upon landing in Scotland, the president was quick to tout his important diplomatic engagements with the British Prime Minister and European Union chief, while simultaneously lambasting reporters for what he termed their fixation on the controversy. "I'm focused on making deals. I'm not focused on conspiracy theories that you are," Trump asserted, dismissing the inquiries as nonsense and urging a focus on national success. However, his attempts to distance himself by cocooning at his Turnberry club were met with public defiance as hundreds of protesters took to the streets across Scotland. Bethany Reid, an art student in Aberdeen, articulated the widespread discontent, noting that demonstrators were zeroing in on Trump's ties to Epstein and that a van bearing a chumming image of Trump and Epstein together had been circulating downtown ahead of his visit. "It's a thing people are targeting against him as they should," Reid stated, underscoring the public's demand for accountability. The controversy's shadow extended even to the president's diplomatic achievements. During his stay, Trump met with EU chief Ursula von der Leyen, clinching a last-minute trade deal just days before higher tariffs were set to take effect, a pact he heralded as a very big deal, the biggest of all the deals. Yet questions lingered about the timing of the announcement. When asked by a reporter whether the rush to finalize the deal was an attempt to divert attention from the Epstein narrative, Trump reacted sharply, exclaiming, "Oh, you got to be kidding me. No. I have nothing to do with it. Only you would think that." The president also found himself pressed to clarify his relationship with Epstein, particularly their falling out after discussing the food crisis in Gaza with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Trump explained that his estrangement stemmed from Epstein hiring away workers from his Mar-a-Lago estate. "He stole people that work for me," Trump stated, recalling his warning to Epstein not to repeat the act. When Epstein did so again, Trump declared him persona non grata, throwing him out. Later on Air Force One, Trump confirmed to NPR's Ordonez that these workers were indeed young women from the Mar-a-Lago spa, reiterating that his concern was simply Epstein taking our people, whether it was spa or not spa. Despite pressure for more information even from his own MAGA base, Trump consistently maintains that the controversy is a political hoax inflated beyond proportion by his adversaries. Beyond the immediate firestorm, the broader political currents continue to shape the national dialogue, with President Trump's approval ratings and the battle for future congressional control dominating strategic discussions. According to an analysis from NBC News' Steve Kornacki, the president's job approval rating currently stands at 43% in a running average of independent public polling. While historically a low number, it represents a slight improvement, a notch higher, compared to this point in 2017, the first year of his initial term. This average, comprising 13 polls released within the past 2 weeks, notably includes a Gallup survey that placed Trump's approval significantly lower at 37%, highlighting the variance in public sentiment. The implications of these numbers are particularly significant for the 2026 midterm elections, where control of the House of Representatives could hinge on a net shift of just 3 seats. The highly polarized electorate, with so many seats now firmly entrenched along partisan lines, suggests an unusually small battleground. This dynamic might allow the Republican Party to maintain its House majority even without a broadly popular Trump, a theory bolstered by the 2022 midterms, where Democrats limited their losses despite then-President Joe Biden's low approval rating of 44% in exit polls. Should Trump manage to sustain his current standing or even boost it by a few points, the playing field for next year could become exceptionally competitive. Conversely, a slight dip could dramatically alter the electoral calculus. While historical precedents show abrupt shifts in presidential approval, like George W. Bush's post-Katrina decline or Biden's post-Afghanistan dip, Trump's public image has remarkably remained largely stable over the past decade, suggesting that for most, opinions have long been solidified. This complex political environment is further underscored by the ongoing power struggles within Washington, extending to the judiciary. This week, Republican senators successfully confirmed Emil Bova, former Trump lawyer, to a lifetime appeals court judgeship. This appointment proceeded despite significant objections from Democrats and whistleblowers, marking another strategic victory for the administration in shaping the long-term composition of the federal courts. Concurrently, the contentious issue of redistricting has resurfaced, as Texas Republicans advance plans for mid-decade congressional map redrawing. Democrats in New York have unveiled their own counter-scheme. Their proposed bill would allow state lawmakers to conduct mid-decade redistricting, but only if another state initiates such a move first. This legislatively referred constitutional amendment would require passage in 2 consecutive legislative sessions and voter approval, meaning any new maps wouldn't take effect until the 2028 elections. Illustrating the arduous and long-term nature of these partisan battles for electoral advantage. The convergence of these events, a president unable to escape a high-profile scandal even on a diplomatic trip, the nuanced shifts in public approval, and the strategic entrenchment of partisan power through judicial appointments and redistricting, paints a vivid picture of the current political moment. As the 2026 midterms loom closer, the interplay between public perception, legal controversies, and legislative maneuvering will undoubtedly continue to define the American political landscape, with every development under intense scrutiny and carrying significant implications for the nation's future direction. The global economic landscape is undergoing a profound and unprecedented transformation as President Donald Trump's ambitious vision for international trade rapidly solidifies, ushering in an era of elevated tariffs not seen in generations. This dramatic shift, marked by major economies like the European Union and Japan acquiescing to significantly higher duties, represents a colossal economic experiment whose long-term ramifications remain hotly debated and largely uncertain, even as it appears to deliver a political victory for the administration. Over the past 6 months, the United States has systematically dismantled the decades-old global trade order, replacing it with a new paradigm where America's economic might is explicitly leveraged to impose tariffs ranging from 15% to 20% on key trading partners. Even higher rates are being applied to critical products like steel and to specific nations deemed adversarial, such as China. This aggressive strategy has seemingly validated President Trump's belief in tariffs as a powerful bargaining tool, with the muted market reaction to recent deals, particularly with Japan and the EU, suggesting a surprising degree of acceptance or perhaps resignation among investors. Nigel Green, CEO of Turnberry Group, aptly termed the EU deal a reset, not a resolution, noting that while markets a year ago would have recoiled, today they're simply grateful it wasn't worse. Yet the apparent political triumph masks deep economic uncertainties. The administration's embrace of tariff levels reminiscent of the early 20th century, typically employed by developing economies to shield nascent industries, marks a radical departure for an industrial powerhouse. President Trump and his proponents contend that these import taxes will invigorate U.S. manufacturing, create domestic factory jobs, and be borne by foreign governments rather than American consumers. Clyde Prestovitz, founder of the Economic Strategy Institute, even draws parallels to historical mercantilist policies that enriched nations like England and the pre-1946 U.S. However, a broad consensus among economists contradicts this view, predicting that the tariffs will invariably translate into higher prices for both businesses importing goods and the consumers who ultimately purchase them. This, they argue, will inevitably slow the economy and undermine the very manufacturing revival the tariffs aim to achieve. Recent reports from automakers like General Motors and Volkswagen, which have cited over $1 billion in tariff-related hits, underscore these concerns. The full economic impact of these tariffs is still unfolding, as economic research suggests it can take anywhere from 6 to 18 months for the effects to fully permeate supply chains. Diane Swunk, chief economist at KPMG, points out that while the expectation was for an instantaneous effect, the uneven rollout and stop-start nature of the tariffs mean the true picture is still emerging. Brad Setzer, an economist at the Council on Foreign Relations, anticipates that the tariffs are big enough that they're going to slow the economy and constitute a meaningful change in policy, one that I think most Americans will feel. While unlikely to trigger a recession, he foresees noticeable, though not catastrophic, price increases for consumers by this fall, particularly for goods from Asian countries such as small appliances, clothing, and toys, which face 20 to 30% duties. Compounding the complexity of this economic landscape is the Federal Reserve's delicate balancing act amidst intense political pressure. President Trump has persistently urged the central bank to lower interest rates, arguing it would boost the economy by making borrowing cheaper and reduce the government's debt servicing costs. Despite this aggressive campaign, the Fed is widely expected to hold its key rate steady, resisting calls to prioritize economic stimulus over inflation concerns. The Central Bank's Rate-Setting Committee. The Federal Open Market Committee (FOMC) is weighing robust economic data, including a relatively low 4.1% unemployment rate and all-time stock market highs, against nascent signs of tariff-induced price pressures. Nomura analysts note that Chair Jerome Powell is likely to reiterate the Fed's intention to remain on hold to assess the tariff impact as long as the U.S. economy and labor market remain strong. Indeed, recent inflation readings, particularly in June, have shown an acceleration in price growth for items like apparel, appliances, and toys directly linked to the tariffs. This complicates the Fed's mandate to balance inflation and unemployment. Ironically, Powell himself has indicated that the Fed might have considered rate cuts earlier had it not been for the administration's expansive and volatile tariff policy. The ongoing pressure from the White House has raised concerns about the central bank's long-standing independence, though Powell has shown no signs of caving. While some FOMC members appointed by Trump openly advocate for lower rates, the committee has historically avoided more than one dissent, reflecting both economic uncertainty and potential political undercurrents. Even if the Fed holds rates steady this month, markets are pricing in a high probability of a cut by September. However, a cut in the Fed's short-term target rate doesn't automatically translate to lower consumer borrowing costs for mortgages or car loans, which are more influenced by longer-term rates like the 10-year Treasury yield, itself sensitive to inflation expectations. Experts warn that any perceived political interference, such as an attempt to remove Powell, could unanchor inflation expectations, leading to higher interest rates across the economy, including for federal government borrowing. At its core, a tariff is simply a tax on imported goods. Typically a percentage of a product's value which importers pay to the government and often pass on to consumers. President Trump's rationale for imposing these duties is multifaceted: to encourage domestic consumption of American-made goods, to increase tax revenue, and crucially to reduce the U.S. trade deficit, which he views as evidence of other nations taking advantage of America. Since returning to office, his administration has implemented a baseline 10% tariff on nearly all imports, with higher reciprocal rates for worst offenders and specific duties like 50% on steel, aluminum, and copper, and 25% on foreign-made cars and parts. While many announcements have been amended or delayed, deals have been struck with countries like the UK 10%, Vietnam 20%, Philippines 19%, Japan 15%, and the EU 15%, including cars. However, as the August 1 deadline looms, a significant portion of U.S. imports, accounting for 56% according to Goldman Sachs, still lack preliminary agreements, including major partners like Canada, Mexico, China, South Korea, Brazil, and India. The administration has even signaled new tariffs on semiconductors and pharmaceuticals, potentially further rerouting global trade flows. The global economy has certainly felt the ripple effects. Initial volatility in stock markets has somewhat stabilized, but the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD) have both downgraded their 2025 global economic growth predictions due to the tariffs. Domestically, while the U.S. is less trade-dependent than many of its partners, the effects are undeniable. The U.S. economy surprisingly shrank in the first 3 months of 2025 after strong growth in late 2024. Analysts confirm that tariffs are already feeding into the overall U.S. inflation rate, which rose to 2.7% in the year to June, up from 2.4% the previous month, with companies like Adidas and Mattel planning to pass on higher costs. The Yale Budget Lab estimates an average income loss of $2,400 per U.S. household in 2025 due to these tariffs. Moreover, the tariffs complicate intricate global supply chains, leading to increased costs for domestically manufactured goods that rely on imported components and even tighter customs checks, causing border delays. Ultimately, President Trump's trade policy has fundamentally redrawn the global economic map, establishing a high-tariff landscape that, while offering a degree of certainty for businesses by averting even steeper levies, still locks in elevated costs compared to pre-Trump levels. The crucial question of whether this vast economic experiment will yield sustained prosperity or merely a reshuffling of economic pain remains open. The delicate dance between political ambition and economic reality, played out across trade negotiations and central bank decisions, will continue to define the trajectory of the U.S. and global economies for the foreseeable future, with millions of households poised to feel the impact. The geopolitical chessboard is seeing intensified moves and high-stakes gambles, with the White House's patience seemingly wearing thin in the ongoing Ukraine conflict, while internal power dynamics ripple through the U.S. defense establishment. As President Donald Trump issues a fresh ultimatum to Moscow, signaling a dramatic shift in his administration's approach, questions abound regarding the Kremlin's calculus and the future of American defense leadership. In a striking departure from months of diplomatic overtures, President Trump announced on Tuesday that he is very disappointed with Vladimir Putin, giving the Russian leader a mere 10 days to agree to a ceasefire or face a new wave of economic sanctions. This tight new deadline, following a previous 50-day ultimatum in early July, underscores a significant change of tone from Washington. For the past 6 months, the Trump administration had pursued a strategy of appeasement, offering Russia concession after concession in U.S.-led negotiations that began in February 2025. These proposals included allowing Russia to retain control over occupied Ukrainian territories, ruling out Ukraine's NATO membership, and easing sanctions on Moscow. There were even reports that Trump explored officially recognizing Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea. White House officials further signaled this accommodating stance by ceasing public criticism of Russia's invasion and withdrawing from international efforts to hold the Putin regime accountable for war crimes. Despite these remarkably favorable terms, which many would have considered an unprecedented triumph for the Kremlin, Putin has remained unyielding, while theoretically endorsing peace efforts. The Russian ruler has consistently employed stalling tactics and insisted on maximalist demands that would effectively end Ukrainian statehood, derailing any meaningful progress. This intransigence has forced President Trump to confront the reality that Putin has no intention of ending the war, prompting the White House's recent policy reversal, including renewed U.S. arms deliveries to Ukraine via European allies and this week's ultimatum. The core enigma remains: why would Putin reject such a seemingly generous peace offer, one that promised an honorable exit from a costly war that has damaged Russia's global standing?
Analysis suggests multiple interconnected reasons. Primarily, Putin believes he is winning.
The Russian army is making slow but steady advances along the front lines, methodically wearing down Ukraine's military. With the battlefield initiative firmly in his hands, he likely anticipates prevailing in a war of attrition against a smaller opponent. This confidence is further bolstered by the perceived limitations of international support for Ukraine, where substantial aid has often been delayed or restricted due to domestic political considerations and widespread Western fears of Russian escalation. Domestically, the war has paradoxically created a new economic and political reality that benefits the Kremlin. Since 2022, Russia has successfully shifted its economy onto a war footing, with massive increases in military spending and soldier payouts offsetting sanctions' impact. Russian factories are reportedly churning out more armaments than all NATO countries combined, and millions of ordinary Russian families have seen their wealth increase, albeit unevenly due to inflation and high interest rates in other sectors. Oil and gas exports have been successfully redirected to new markets in the global south, and local alternatives have replaced exiting Western companies, creating lucrative opportunities for Putin's inner circle. A ceasefire would jeopardize this entire economic model, risking destabilizing consequences. Politically, the full-scale invasion has allowed the Kremlin to complete Russia's transformation from a flawed democracy to a dictatorship. Opponents are exiled, jailed, or dead, independent media is extinguished, and civil liberties are curtailed. There is effectively no anti-war movement in Putin's hold on power until at least 2036 appears unchallenged. Furthermore, the prospect of peace presents a significant internal security challenge: the demobilization of hundreds of thousands of brutalized Russian soldiers. These veterans, accustomed to exceptional salaries and bonuses, would face vastly reduced prospects upon returning to civilian life. Putin is acutely aware of that Afghan syndrome, the role of returning Red Army soldiers in the spiraling banditry of the 1990s, and is likely loath to risk a repeat of such social upheaval. However, the most decisive factor fueling Putin's resolve, according to experts, is his deeply held conviction that Ukrainian statehood poses an existential threat to Russia. He views Ukraine as an indivisible part of Russia's historical heartland, seeing its independence as a geopolitical catastrophe and a symbol of the Soviet collapse's injustice. Haunted by the pro-democracy movements that led to the USSR's fall, Putin believes an independent democratic Ukraine could trigger the next stage of a Russian imperial retreat. This obsession has been evident in his rhetoric, from insisting Ukrainians are one people to explicitly attacking Ukraine as an artificial anti-Russia. His pre-invasion 5,000-word essay denying Ukraine's right to exist, coupled with the systematic Russification and eradication of Ukrainian identity in occupied territories, reveals the invasion's true aim: to destroy Ukraine as a state and a nation. From Putin's perspective, any peace deal that guarantees Ukraine's continued existence as an independent state would be an historic Russian defeat. If Ukraine survives, Russia loses, one analyst summarized. This complex geopolitical landscape is playing out amidst significant internal shifts within the U.S. Department of Defense. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, whose tenure has been marked by controversy, has found a new target: think tanks. The Pentagon recently pulled out of the long-running Aspen Security Forum, with spokesperson Sean Parnell stating the forum did not align with the department's efforts to increase the lethality of our warfighters, revitalize the warrior ethos, and project peace through strength on the world stage. He further asserted that these organizations promote the evil of globalism, disdain for our great country, and hatred for the President of the United States. A remarkable accusation, given the forum's history of hosting senior government officials from both parties, military leaders, and international figures, including former Defense Secretary Mark Esper, a Trump appointee. Hegseth's 6 months in office have been turbulent, marked by allegations during his confirmation process, which he vehemently denied, abrupt staff firings, accusations of chaos, and questions regarding his handling of sensitive military plans, including sharing classified information on an unsecured chat. He also reportedly suspended aid to Ukraine 3 times, decisions later reversed by the White House. Despite public affirmations of confidence from President Trump, private frustrations have been reported. Amidst this, sources indicate that Secretary Hegseth has privately discussed running for political office in Tennessee next year, potentially for governor. Such a move would necessitate his resignation, as the Defense Department prohibits civilian employees from running for political office. While two sources characterized these discussions as serious, the Pentagon's chief spokesman Sean Parnell vehemently denied the reports, labeling them fake news. NBC, and asserting Hegseth's focus remains solely on serving under President Trump. Hegseth has previously run for the U.S. Senate in Minnesota in 2012, withdrawing after failing to secure the GOP nomination. Potential eligibility issues exist for a Tennessee gubernatorial run, including a 7-year residency requirement and Republican primary voting history. Should Hegseth depart, potential replacements include Army Secretary Dan Driscoll or Policy Chief Elbridge Colby. As these political and military dramas unfold, the U.S. military continues its technological advancements. The Space Force announced that its X-37B spaceplane is set for its 8th mission next month, aiming to test laser communications and an alternative GPS system. Such developments highlight the ongoing strategic imperative for technological superiority. Even as the immediate focus remains on the ground in Eastern Europe and the political machinations in Washington, the coming weeks will be critical. The effectiveness of Trump's ultimatum, the scale and impact of renewed military aid to Ukraine, and the stability of the Pentagon's leadership will all shape the trajectory of global security. Western leaders face the immense challenge of transforming the military realities on the ground to force Putin to question his confidence in victory, which entails providing Ukraine with the means to defend itself and regain the initiative. This must be coupled with far tougher sanctions targeting Russia's energy exports and secondary sanctions on those helping Moscow bypass existing measures. Ultimately, the path to a sustainable peace, as experts suggest, requires Western leaders to demonstrate the resolve to compel Putin to abandon his imperial ambitions and accept the irreversible reality of an independent Ukraine, a confrontation with stakes that could hardly be higher for the future of the international order. In a striking convergence of high-stakes diplomacy and personal enterprise, former President Donald Trump's recent visit to Scotland has ignited a fresh debate over the increasingly blurred lines between presidential duties and private business interests. The trip, initially framed by his team as a private affair centered on the ribbon-cutting of a new course at Trump International Scotland, quickly morphed into a working visit, complete with squeezed meetings with European and British leaders, all while heavily leveraging his own branded properties. This dynamic, as reported by the Wall Street Journal on Tuesday, July 29, 2025, has reignited concerns that the presidency itself is functioning as an extension of the Trump business brand, with potentially profound implications for American diplomacy. The journey to Aberdeenshire, which saw Trump disembarking from Air Force One at Prestwick Airport, was not merely a ceremonial opening. It became a masterclass in what critics are calling a brazen mixing of power and profit. Anna Masaglia, an investigative journalist, highlighted on MSNBC News that the trip's cost to U.S. taxpayers is estimated at around $10 million, a figure based on past GAO reports concerning Trump's personal visits. Yet for Trump, the financial returns could be exponentially greater. Since entering the White House in 2017, Trump has reported over $206 million in income from his Scottish businesses, accounting for roughly half of his $412 million haul from foreign businesses during that period, making Scotland his most lucrative foreign venture. The meetings held during the Scottish visit, predominantly at Trump-branded venues, included significant figures such as European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Scottish First Minister John Swinney, and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Beyond these official engagements, widespread speculation in the UK media has centered on alleged pressure from the President and White House officials to secure the Open Championship for Trump's Turnberry golf course. While UK officials reportedly met with the R&A, the tournament's governing body, to discuss Turnberry's feasibility, the R&A's chief executive confirmed good dialogue with Eric Trump but reiterated that the decision would not be swayed by UK government requests. He also noted the logistical challenges of hosting an event of such scale at Turnberry, suggesting no immediate plans.
Nevertheless,
the pursuit of such a prestigious tournament underscores the potential for diplomatic leverage to translate into significant prestige and cold hard cash for a private property.
This pattern of intertwining official travel with business expansion is not isolated to Scotland.
Trump's second term has seen the Trump Organization announce a flurry of international projects, often in close proximity to his presidential travel. His first major international trip in this term, for instance, included stops in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, countries where new Trump-branded developments like Trump Tower Jeddah, Trump Tower Dubai, and a new golf resort in Qatar are underway. The Qatar Golf Resort notably is a partnership described as being with Saudi Arabia-based Dar Global, but also involves Qatari Diyar, a firm established by the Qatari government-owned investment authority and led by a Qatari government official. As Eric Trump stated, "We are incredibly proud to expand the Trump brand into Qatar through this exceptional collaboration with Qatari Diyar and Dar Global, further blurring the lines between private enterprise and state-backed entities." Adding to these entanglements is the controversial $400 million luxury 747 jet gifted by Qatar, intended to replace the aging Air Force One and reportedly slated for transfer to Trump's presidential library after his term, raising further questions about personal benefits derived from foreign states. These incidents highlight a broader and more brazen disregard for what were once considered fundamental ethical norms in American politics. During his first term, Trump ostensibly pledged to distance himself from his business interests, promising no involvement whatsoever and signing an ethics agreement to avoid new foreign deals.
However, this pledge has evaporated. As MSNBC points out,
the ethics agreement upon his return to the White House opened a glaring loophole by allowing new international business ventures as long as they are not directly with foreign governments. This permits deals with firms and individuals closely tied to or even partnering at arm's length with foreign governments, precisely like the Qatari project. The emoluments clause, designed to prevent federal officeholders from accepting benefits from foreign states without congressional approval, remains a significant unresolved concern, with critics arguing that its spirit is being violated even if direct legal challenges have been dismissed. The Hill, in its Tuesday, July 29, 2025 report, goes further, asserting that Trump is causing generational damage to American diplomacy. This sentiment is echoed in public discourse, with a poll by AOL.com asking whether hosting Trump is good diplomacy or a diplomatic disaster waiting to happen.
Reflecting widespread apprehension,
protesters in the UK have planned demonstrations against both his recent private trip and a full-blown state visit planned for September, accusing him of undermining democratic norms and spreading hate, and arguing that the UK should not be rolling out the red carpet. While White House sources insist the trips are purely diplomatic, the perception of a president leveraging his office for personal gain risks undermining the integrity and effectiveness of American foreign policy.
From Doha and Dubai to Doonbeg in Aberdeenshire, Donald Trump's second term is undeniably reshaping the very definition of diplomacy when the president is also a proprietor. The traditional boundaries between statecraft and self-interest are not merely blurred, they are being actively redrawn, with the current administration holding the pen. This trend sets a new and potentially troubling precedent for future U.S. foreign policy, where the pursuit of national interests may increasingly contend with or even be overshadowed by the private financial interests of its highest officeholder. The long-term consequences for America's standing on the global stage and the integrity of its diplomatic engagements remain an unfolding narrative demanding continued scrutiny.